Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us for today's webinar, The Role of Architecture in Shaping Equitable Communities. My name is Claire, and I am the Deputy Registrar at the OAA. We will begin today's webinar by acknowledging the land on which we are meeting and calling them from. For millennia, the place we call Ontario has been inhabited by Indigenous peoples and nations who have been stewards of the land and are deeply connected to its rich cultural and natural landscape. We would like to invite you in a moment of reflection to acknowledge our shared responsibility to address past and present injustices and provide space for Indigenous knowledge and worldview to shape the architectural landscape of Turtle Island. So before we begin the webinar, I would just like to share some important information to ensure an effective and professional webinar experience. Please know that this session is being recorded for quality and education purposes. In order to maintain a stable internet connection, we have muted all participant microphones and disabled video feeds. We would highly encourage engagement through our Q&A window. So please feel free at any point to submit questions that you have for our speaker. Those questions will be addressed in the designated Q&A period at the end of the presentation. And also note that the chat function is also deactivated during this webinar. For those of you who are seeking continuing education learning hours, note that your attendance is crucial. So you'll need a minimum of 80% attendance to be accredited those hours to your transcript. We would just ask that you allow a few weeks for processing and reporting of these hours. And finally, please know that the presenter does not provide insurance, legal, or practice advice, and the OAA does not bear responsibility for errors or omissions in discussions during the webinar. For accessibility, we provide automated closed captioning services available in multiple languages to accommodate the needs of our diverse audience. And now I am very excited to introduce today's speaker. Please welcome Hassan Khan.
Thank you very much, Claire. I appreciate everything. So we'll be talking about the role of architecture in shaping equitable communities. First off, I'll just give a little bit of a bio about myself. I'll be very quick. I know you have about an hour and a half. And I would love to talk about some of the case studies that I have as well. So I'll just be very, very brief. Currently I work as a project director for a company called AsemBl Design and Construction. It's a JV partnership with Core Development. Right now what we're doing is we're doing a lot of townhouse projects. We're doing also mid-rise construction projects in downtown Toronto. We have some projects across downtown, including Parliament Avenue as well. I've also served as a professor as well at Fanshawe in the Toronto campus. I've taught construction courses there as well. I have a PhD in architecture. I'm also part of the RAIC. I'm a PMP and also I'm also a lead green associate. And we'll dive right into the presentation. What I do a lot with my students at Fanshawe was that I would have a breakdown of exactly what I'm going to talk about. So attached is kind of the background, showing the introduction, the topics. So we'll talk about designing for inclusivity, accessibility, portability, sustainable homes, community-driven and participatory design. And then one of the fun stuff that I also want to talk about are some of the case studies that are in line with this program. One of them is the Tor David project in Venezuela, Cuenta Monroy in Chile. We have the High Line in New York, everybody's aware of that, the Mukuru Slum Upgrading Project. And then there's also the Vibon in Germany as well. And then we'll have a conclusion, and then we'll also have a Q&A as well. So we'll delve right into the topics. In terms of, so we'll talk about the introduction. So I'm just looking at my notes. Okay, what will we learn from all of this? So my intention is to ensure that all of the participants here will learn how architecture can actively shape more inclusive, affordability, and equitable communities by applying principles of universal design, sustainability homes, and community-driven planning through global case studies, which we'll talk about. And hopefully participants will gain insights into real-world strategies and successfully address social, economic, and environmental disparities. And then, and then why equity is actually important in architecture. So equity actually is important in architecture because the built environment directly influences who feels included, safe, and empowered in a community. When spaces are designed without considering equity, people can, unintentionally reinforce social, economic, and physical barriers. They feel that deepening inequality, and certainly by prioritizing equity, architects can also create environments that give everyone, regardless of background, ability, income, equal access to opportunities, dignity, and a better quality of life. And then what are the global and local challenges in the context of affordability housing? In affordability, accessibility, and social inclusion. So global and local challenges. Globally and locally, communities face rising home costs that make safe, stable homes increasingly unaffordable, especially for low and mid-class groups, mid-income groups, sorry. Accessibility remains a major challenge as a lot of spaces are still not designed to accommodate people of all ages and abilities as well. Social inclusion is often poor. Social and then designing for inclusivity and accessibility. First off, understanding inclusivity in architecture. And then if you look at the definition of inclusivity in architecture, inclusivity means designing spaces that are welcoming, accessible, and functional for people of all ages, abilities, backgrounds, and identities. It ensures that everyone, regardless of physical ability, cultural background, and socioeconomic status, can fully participate and benefit from the built environments. Inclusive architecture goes beyond the minimum standards to create environments that celebrate diversity and promote equal access to opportunities and experiences. And then in terms of universal design principles and accessibility standards, universal design principles focus on creating environments that are usable by all people to the greatest extent possible without the need for adaptation and specialized design. They usually emphasize features like step-free access, intuitive layouts, adaptive spaces, and clear wayfinding to ensure ease of use for everyone. So wayfinding is something that we'll talk about in greater detail as well. And then if you look at the role of public spaces in fostering inclusivity, public space certainly plays a vital role in fostering inclusivity and offer accessible, safe, and welcoming areas where people from all backgrounds can interact and participate. By removing physical and social barriers, inclusive public spaces help bridge gaps between different groups and support healthier, more vibrant communities. And then also right here, in terms of understanding inclusivity in architecture, we'll use 2 case studies of successful inclusive designs. And I love to use examples in Toronto, and I'm sure many architects who are even on this call were involved in these projects as well, and kudos to you. So we'll talk about the Regent Park revitalization. So right here. So the Regent Park revitalization transformed Canada's oldest and largest social housing project into a mixed income, mixed use, and culturally vibrant community. The new design emphasized the inclusivity through accessibility to accessible parks, community centers, and public art, promoting social interaction among the community and incomes of all backgrounds by integrating affordable homes with market rates and abundant public amenities. The project successfully breaks down stigmas and fosters a more equitable urban environment. And then the second one is the Nathan Phillips Square revitalization. I encourage a lot of people to come here and visit the space. The revitalization of Nathan Phillips Square, led by Plant Architects and Perkins as well, reimagined Toronto's civic heart as an accessible, welcoming, and inclusive public space. Improvements include barrier-free access, widened pathways, tactile wayfinding strips, and a new peace garden that invites reflection and community gathering by trying to make this space, the square, easier to navigate and more inclusive for people of all abilities, ages, and project reinforces its role as a true public commons for all Torontonians. Just a little bit of a background with Regent Park. My parents moved to Canada in 1976, and we lived in Regent Park. I was born in Toronto, and I firsthand saw the revitalization myself. Big improvement. Kudos to the designers and the community that was involved in this. So key strategies for inclusive design. So we're talking about a couple of topics. So with this is universal access in public buildings and spaces. So first thing is the barrier-free entrances and circulation. So it's good to design wide, step-free entrances, ramps, automatic doors, and clear accessible pathways to ensure seamless entry and movements for people of all mobilities, including wheelchairs, parents with strollers, and elderly individuals. And this is certainly what we're doing in downtown Toronto. It's a very good example of what we're doing. And certainly inclusive wayfinding and signage, very important. When you talk about, incorporating clear, easy to read signage, and tactile braille and visual cues at appropriate heights, helping users of all abilities navigate spaces independently and confidently. So with that, certainly you got hotel projects, you got apartment buildings, you got community centers that now engage in this sort of practice, right? So when you look at flexible and multi-sensory environments, right? Very key, designing spaces that cater to diverse sensory needs by including features like adjustable lighting, sound absorbing materials, quiet zones, and seating options, making public areas comfortable for people with sensory sensitivities or cognitive disabilities. And then next we'll do is we'll talk about the age and ability friendly infrastructure, sensory cognitive accessibility, child-centered safety and engagement. So age and ability friendly infrastructure incorporate features like non-slip flooring, handrails, resting spots, gentle ramps, and elevators to support safe and comfortable use by elderly individuals and people with mobility challenges as well. Sensory and cognitive accessibility, designing environments that reduce sensory overload by using clear signage, high contrast colors, simple layouts, tactile elements, making spaces more intuitive and welcoming for people with cognitive disabilities and visual impairments. And lastly, child-centered safety and engagement. Integrate child-friendly design features such as low height rails, interactive play areas, safe open spaces, and family restrooms to ensure young users can navigate and enjoy spaces independently and safely. Certainly a lot of, actually, we're all doing this, based on certainly the building code requirements. And like I said, Canada is also one of the top countries that are using laws effectively. And because, one of the requirements for an architect, right, is to ensure public safety. And when I look at these practices here compared to different parts of the world, I'm very glad that I live in a country like Canada. So key strategies for inclusive design. We'll talk about prioritizing accessibility to public transport, mixed use and mixed income development, safe and inclusive public spaces around transit. Now, after talking about all this, you'll look at my case studies and some of it will make sense why I'm talking about all this and how I'm tying that in. Without wasting further time, I'll get into the meat and potatoes. So prioritizing accessibilities to public transit. It's good to design communities so that housing, workplaces, schools, services are all within easy walking distance of transit hubs, ensuring people of all incomes and abilities can access reliable, affordable transportation. Mixed use and mixed income development, right? It's good to encourage a blend of residential, commercial, and community spaces near transit stations, including affordable housing options to prevent displacements and promote inclusive, economic, diverse neighborhoods, safe and inclusive public spaces around transit, create pedestrian-friendly streetscapes, well-lit walkways, bike lanes, and accessible transit stops that make travel safer and more welcoming for seniors, for example, people with disabilities, children, low-income users. Certainly, like I said, we're implementing this as well in Toronto. Come up with a little Venn diagram showing, how we have the transit-oriented development for equitable mobility as the hub, and breaking down all the topics that I just talked about. For example, safe and inclusive public spaces around transit, mixed use and mixed income development, prioritizing accessibility to public transit. And certainly these slides will be shared as well. Public parks and community spaces designed for all. So when you talk about universal accessibility in park layouts, it's good to design parks with a wide, smooth, and gently sloped paths, accessible playground equipment, seating at various heights, and barrier-free entrances to welcome people of all ages and abilities as well. Inclusive programming and amenities offer diverse amenity spaces like sensory gardens, quiet zones, sports areas, picnic spots, excuse me, and cultural spaces that cater to different interests, abilities, and age groups, encouraging broader community engagement. And we talk about community co-design and participation, involve local residents, especially underrepresented groups, in the design process to ensure that parks reflect the needs, cultures, and the values of the whole community, fostering a strong sense of belonging. And then we look at mixed-use developments that cater to diverse needs. We look at integrated living, working and leisure spaces, design developments that combine residential units, workspaces, retail, healthcare, education, and recreation facilities within walkable distances, creating vibrant, self-sustaining communities for people of all ages and groups. And to look at affordable and inclusive housing options, this is going to be one of the main topics of discussion, affordable housing. It's good to incorporate a mix of housing types, such as rental units, affordable homes, family-size apartments, and senior spaces to support the socioeconomic diversity and prevent displacement. Once again, in our case studies, we'll be talking about this as well. And last, flexible and adaptive design features, designing spaces that can easily adapt over time to changing community needs, such as converting offices into residential units or creating pop-up markets and flexible event spaces, ensuring long-term inclusivity and resilience. These are some of the projects that I've worked on in my earlier years where we've done adaptive design, taking unused spaces and turning them into spaces, right? Certainly with building permits and the whole building process. So key strategies for inclusive design, policy and regulatory frameworks. This is actually one of the key topics before we get into the case studies. So strengthening accessibility codes and standards. It's good to enforce and regularly update building codes, accessibility standards like in Canada, the AODA in Ontario, and urban design guidelines to ensure that inclusivity is a mandatory part of all new developments and public spaces. Second, incentivizing inclusive and affordable developments. This was one of the key things that I did as a developer when I worked for a few companies where people offer financial incentives, grants, or density bonuses to developers who integrate affordable homes, accessible features, and community-focused designs into their projects, promoting equity through policy. And last, community consultation requirements, which we're all doing, mandating meaningful community engagements, consultation processes as part of the planning approvals, ensuring that diverse voices, especially marginalized groups, are heard and reflected in the final designs, giving them some sort of say, right, taking their opinions into consideration. Very, very, very interesting. So what we'll do is we will now start getting into the case studies. I'm just keeping an eye on time to ensure that we are on track. So case study number one, we'll look at the Mukuru Slum Upgrading Project. Just for context, I'm not a big fan of the word slum, but certainly when you travel all across the world, you kind of understand how that word kind of derived. If you're born and raised in Toronto like myself, it's an eye-opener when you're traveling. And these are certain articles that are written by professionals, which I'm reiterating. So first project that the case study that we'll talk about is the Mukuru Slum Upgrading Project. Just to kind of give a little bit of an introduction, the Mukuru Slum Upgrading Project is a large-scale urban renewal initiative in Nairobi, Kenya, aimed at improving the living conditions of Mukuru informal settlements and the residents there. Mukuru is one of the Nairobi's biggest slums, with over 100,000 people that are in an overcrowded condition, lacking basic infrastructure, 10-year security, which we'll talk about, and access to essential services. So here's an actual map that I found online, and certainly Nairobi has a total of 5 areas that are underdeveloped and classified as quote slum areas. And as much of a serious topic as this is, one of the comical things that I see about this map is that you got all these slums, and then you got the Hilton right in the center of the map. And we're just like, oh wow, why was this even put there? For what reason? Right. So anyway, this is something that I pointed out. That's very interesting. But if you look at the biggest area here, it's the Mukuru slum, which I'm going to talk about 100,000 residents that are actually in this area. So key components of the project. So we'll talk about land tenure security. Many of the Mukuru residents live on land without formal ownership, making them vulnerable to evictions. The project seeks to formalize land ownership through legal frameworks, ensuring that the residents have secure tenure. Land is being categorized as special planning areas, SPA. Certainly SPA is different from what we view it as, but their SPA abbreviation is special planning areas to allow for structured redevelopment. And then when you look at the infrastructure development, road networks, expanding and paving roads to improve accessibilities, water supply, laying new water pipelines to provide clean, affordable water over there, the sanitation and drainage, installing sewer lines, drainage lines, waste management solutions to improve hygiene, and also trying to prevent a flood. Affordable housing, one of my favorite topics to talk about. Many existing homes in Mukuru are makeshift structures made of corrugated material and other temporary products. The project introduces low-cost, durable housing to replace these structures. Housing models focus on incremental upgrading, which we'll talk about as well, where people can improve their homes over time rather than face sudden relocation. Social housing and economic empowerment. Healthcare. Expanding access to all health facilities, maternal care, disease prevention programs. Education. Improving schools, providing scholarship, and enhancing vocational training. Livelihood programs, creating job opportunities, and supporting small businesses and to ensure economic stability. Community engagement and participatory planning. The project actively involves the residents, local organizations, NGOs in decision-making processes. Public participation ensures that the project meets the needs of the community rather than imposing top-down solutions. Workshops and community forums are held to gather input and address concerns. And certainly, there are challenges and considerations. Funding constraints. The project requires substantial financial investment and maintaining funding in an ongoing challenge. Number two, relocation and displacement. Some residents may need temporary relocation during the redevelopment, raising concerns about where they will go and when they can return. This is an example that I was talking about earlier, how when I used to work for developers and we used to offer incentives, right? If no incentives are offered, then a project can't be successful. And last, resistance from informal landlords. A lot of them in Mukuru operate informally and may resist changes that threaten their rental income. So imagine a person who's a landlord informally renting areas, and then the government comes in and takes over, right? There's no formal paperwork. And these are some of the challenges that people go through. So the overall impact, the Mukuru slum upgrading project is part of Kenya's Vision 2030 for sustainable urban redevelopment. It aims to create a livable, dignified environment for people, reducing poverty, improving public health, and fostering long-term economic growth. So this is certainly a project that is still ongoing. And you'll see also different parts around the world, like in Saudi Arabia, there's also a vision of 2030, right? I would argue even Toronto is probably going through a similar project like that, making net zero promises, and certainly enforcing that protocol. So now we'll go on to affordable and sustainable housing solutions. If you just give me a minute, just going to organize my notes. So the global housing crisis and equity. Why housing affordability is a critical issue. Well, certainly foundation for social equity. Affordable housing ensures that people of all income levels can live with dignity, stability, and access to essential services, creating more equitable and diverse communities. Preventing displacement and homelessness. When housing costs outpace incomes, vulnerable populations are pushed out of neighborhoods or into homelessness, deepening social divides and economic inequality. Strengthening community health and resilience. Stable, affordable homes is linked to better health outcomes, educational achievements, and economic productivity, making it essential for building strong, resilient, and inclusive towns. And then the role of architects in addressing affordability, designing cost-effective, high-quality spaces. The architects can use smart design strategies like modular construction, efficient layouts, and sustainable materials to create affordable, durable, and attractive homes without compromising on quality, which certainly we are doing in downtown Toronto. And I've seen a lot of improvements that are going on with our community, and certainly you look at pros and cons for that. So number two, advocating for inclusive policies and projects. Architects can work with policymakers, developers, and communities to champion affordable housing initiatives, influence zoning changes, prioritizing equity in urban planning, innovating with alternative housing models as well. Architects can explore and promote new models like the co-housing micro units and adaptive reuse of existing structures to create diverse, affordable living options that meet different community needs. Just looking at time. Yeah, okay. So using energy efficient, low cost materials. So there's, you'll also notice that LEED has taken over as well. I recently became a LEED accredited, and I'm looking at the benefits of this. And this will also tie into our presentation as well. So if you use energy efficient, low cost materials, incorporate locally sourced, recycled, or low energy materials to reduce construction costs and long-term utility expenses, making housing more affordable and environmentally friendly. Certainly there's pros and cons to that. If you work on LEED projects, design projects, you'll notice that some of the clients are reluctant to have a initial cost for energy efficiency because the argument is that it costs a lot of money. But if you look at the overall, the buyout time, in 1-2 years, it can pay for itself. These are some of the things that we got to talk about. But in any rate, designing for climate resilience, creating homes that can withstand extreme weather conditions through passive design strategies, such as natural ventilation, proper insulation, and solar orientation, improving comfort while lowering energy demands. In Canada, what's an example of climate, right? Frost protection in our foundations. These are some of the main things that we look at because we live in Canada, right? In an area that, we can hit below temperatures, right? And it differs from places like Florida. Implementing community-led design approaches, engage local communities in the design and construction processes to ensure housing solutions are culturally appropriate, meet real needs, and empower the residents to maintain and sustain their environments. So this is a very common theme that we'll talk about, right? Is always engaging the residents, right? Seeing their buy-in, looking at the culture diversity around. The benefits of incremental and adaptive homes is affordability through phased development. Incremental housing allows families to build and expand their homes gradually as resources become available, making homeownership more accessible for low-income groups without requiring large upfront investments. Flexibility to evolve with changing needs. Adaptive housing designs enable homes to be more modified easily over time, accommodating growing families, changing incomes, evolving community needs, supporting long-term stability and resilience as well. empowerment and community ownership. When the residents are involved in shaping and expanding their homes, it fosters a stronger sense of ownership, pride, and community engagement, right, which leads to more sustainable and vibrant communities. Strategies for equitable housing. So we're almost at the next topic as well. Prefabrication, modular construction for cost efficiency. So these are some of the implementations that we, where the architects are also promoting as well. You see this a lot in Alberta as well. Streamlining construction to lower costs and expand access. Prefabrication of modular construction, reduce building time, minimize material waste, and cut the labor costs as well, making it possible to deliver high quality, affordable homes faster and more efficiently to underserved communities. Passive design strategies to reduce the energy costs will bring into lead in this as well, lowering the utility cost, implementing ESG processes, climate responsive design. So passive design strategies such as maximizing natural light ventilation, optimizing building orientation, and using thermal mass, reduce reliance on mechanical heats and cooling systems, helping low-income households save significantly on long-term energy bills while promoting environmental sustainability. This will be the future. This is the future, right? We are getting into that practice right now. And strategies for equitable homes, community land trusts, and cooperative housing. So empowering communities to secure long-term affordable housing. Community land trusts and cooperative housing models that enable people to collectively own and manage their own land or housing, keeping homes permanently affordable, protecting against displacement, which is a very common trend in Toronto and Canada, and fostering stronger, more resilient communities. Mixed income housing developments to prevent segregation, creating inclusive communities by blending diverse incomes. Very key when I was researching this. So mixed income housing developments integrate affordable and market rate units within the same community, promoting social cohesion, reducing economic segregation, and providing equitable access to amenities, services, and opportunities for all residents. Now, certainly, one of the questions would be raised is how do you implement this, right? You certainly start off with a project or two, which we've already have, and start to compound that. Right now, we'll also look at challenges. Retrofitting existing structures for affordable housing. Retrofitting, very big common trend. Also LEED accessible, LEED appropriate, revitalization, underused buildings to expand affordable housing options, retrofitting existing structures such as vacant schools, offices, or hotels into affordable homes, preserving resources, reducing construction costs and timelines, and efficiently increasing the availability of inclusive and sustainable homes in urban areas as well. Policies and zoning strategies for affordable housing. One effective policy and zoning strategy of affordable homes is inclusionary zoning. We'll talk a lot about that, which requires developers to include a certain percentage of affordable housing units in new residential developments. This is exactly what I'm doing now. This is exactly what I've been doing in the past for companies that I've worked for. This can help ensure that a portion of new home stock is accessible for lower income families without the need for separate subsidized projects by integrating affordable units within market rate developments. This approach can also promote diverse and mixed income communities while reducing social segregation. And I'm using examples of places where I grew up, was Toronto and Mississauga. We are implementing this sort of practice. And now what we'll do is we'll get into case study number 2, the Quinta Monroy housing project. And I assure you all the case studies that I have are unique in their own way. As an introduction, background, so the Quinta Monroy housing project is a groundbreaking low-cost social housing initiative in Iquique, Chile, designed by the architecture firm Elemental, led by Alejandro Aravena, The project was developed in 2003 to 2004. Now take note on those days as a one-year project to provide affordable incremental housing for 100 families who had been living in informal settlements for over 30 years. Okay, so this is an example of an architect stepped up, worked with policymakers, and implemented this sort of project. So for me, when you look at the project for 100 families, a lot of people, but when you look at the community, it looks fairly small. Nonetheless, this is the first step. So let's look at a couple of things, the problem and the challenges. So, okay, so the Chilean government social housing budget at the time was only $7,500 per family, whether it's American or Canadian. I don't know. It doesn't matter. Regardless, it's $7,500 per family, which was not enough to buy land and build a standard house. So traditionally, the traditional social housing model often relocated the low-income families to the outskirts of the cities, far from their jobs and infrastructures. One of the biggest challenges that we go through even now, the challenge was to build permanent housing in Quinta Monroy while keeping the community in the same urban location. Design and architectural innovation. I take note on the design. Elemental architects propose an incremental housing project where only half of the house was built initially, allowing the residents to expand over time based on their financial means and needs. Key features in the design: half a house concept. The government funded half of each home, providing the essential structure, bathroom, kitchen, stairs, and roof. So families could later expand the unfinished portion as they desired. 3-story row houses. Instead of single-story homes, a 3-story row house was the typology was used to optimize a land use. Shared walls. Units were arranged in a compact grid to reduce construction costs and maximize land efficiency. So that being said, just one more piece to add was flexibility for expansion. Like I said, the residents could legally and safely extend their homes, maintaining structural integrity and improving their living space over time. However, social and economic impact. Affordability. Like I said, $7,500 was spent only on each home. The project proved that high quality housing could be delivered within the government's budget while ensuring future incremental growth. Community stability. Unlike traditional relocation programs, Quinta Monroy allowed families to remain in their original neighborhoods, maintaining social networks and economic opportunities. Scalability. The concept has been replicated in other parts of Chile and internationally as a model for affordable homes. Now, certainly, we're going to go through challenges and criticism. Some of the residents struggled with the cost of expanding their homes, leading to variability in construction quality. An ideal scenario would be, for now, let's build half the house. And then as time goes by, as your family grows, you go through incremental costs and, you make a little bit of money, then you start spending. It's not that easy. These are some of the challenges that they went through during that time because it seemed ideal, but based on the economic trends, it wasn't so ideal. Now, another thing to also talk about was also the visual aesthetic of the expansion process created a patchwork effect. Through this was expected as part of the model's flexibility. Not all families expanded at the same rate, creating the differences in living conditions within the same community. All in all, the Quinta Monroy housing project is a pioneering example of incremental social homes, providing that affordable, high-quality housing can be achieved within tight budget constraints, while allowing residents the flexibility to improve their homes. Its success has influenced global housing policies and inspired similar projects worldwide. Now, certainly, one thing to keep in mind, there's always pros and cons to it. Yes, it has set a precedent for places around the world. When you actually look at the actuality and the reality of it, there's also going to be challenges as well. So community-driven and participatory design. These are one of the topics that I want to talk about that kind of drives this entire process. So why community engagement matters, certainly we all know in Toronto, especially the importance of local input in architectural projects. Local input ensures that architectural projects reflect the true needs, values, and cultural identity of the community, leading to more inclusive and meaningful spaces. And how participatory design enhances social equity? Well, participatory design enhances social equity by actively involving the community members in the decision-making process, giving traditionally marginalized groups a voice in shaping the built environment, and ensuring that spaces serve everyone fairly and respectfully. Challenges and barriers in community participation. A major barrier to community participation is a lack of trust, unfortunately, where the residents may feel their input will not generally influence the project's outcome based on past experiences of being overlooked, right? Certainly people are also worried, scared that they may be displaced, right? They want to have some sort of a cultural engagement, community engagement. Methods for implementing participatory design certainly is community workshops and charrettes, right? Charrettes is very, very important, right? They can also be a lengthy process, but it kind of gives us a little bit of an idea when we're designing. So community workshops and design charrettes create collaborative spaces where residents, designers, and stakeholders can openly share ideas, identify priorities, and co-develop solutions that reflect the community's needs and aspirations. So one thing with the charrettes is that what that I really recommend is having an agenda. Follow the agenda, because if you don't, this charrettes can take hours, days, weeks, right? Coming up with an outcome is also ideal as well. The digital tools and technology for participatory design. Participatory design enhances social equity by actively involving community members in the design making process, giving traditional marginalized groups a voice in shaping the built environment and ensuring that spaces serve everyone fairly and respectfully. And certainly when trying to measure success in community-driven projects, success in community-driven projects can be measured by low, well, and final design reflects community input, and by the level of long-term satisfaction and sense of ownership felt by the residents. And then we get to our next case study, the Highline, New York. So I'm sure a lot of community members, architects have gone to this project. Has a very good background. I studied about this in architecture my first year. Very interesting project. So the Highline. History and background, right? Everything starts off with the background and history. This was built in 1934 as part of the West Side Improvement Project. The High Line was an elevated railway used to transport goods to Manhattan's warehouses and factories as well. By the 1980s, the decline of freight rail led to its abandonment, and it was set for demolition. In 1999, local residents like Joshua David and Robert Hammond co-founded the Friends of the High Line, advocating for its preservation and repurposing. Design and architecture. Designed by James Corner Field Operations, Landscape Architecture, Diller Scofidio, Press Renfro Architecture, and Piet Oudolf Horticulture. Inspired by wild urban nature, the design integrates existing railroad tracks with elevated green spaces, walking paths, and public seating. Features include the meandering pathways that mimic the overgrown rail tracks, viewing platforms and that overlooks with the city of the Hudson River views, public art installations, gardens, and cultural spaces. Here are just some photos showing some of the spaces. Some of them were concepts at one point that implemented into actual construction. When you look at public art, very cultural. I strongly recommend everybody visiting there if you haven't already. But everything all starts off with the background and history and how it evolves. Very unique designs. And this took a group of consultants, a team, to create this and implement this. Also the community. Environmental and social impact. Green infrastructure. Big fan of this. The park uses sustainable landscaping and native plants to promoting biodiversity. Urban renewal. It transformed an abandoned space into a vibrant public park. Economic growth. Increased tourism and property values in surrounding neighborhoods, leading to extensive real estate development. And certainly with every project, we have challenges and criticisms. Gentrification. Property values soared, leading to higher rents and displacements of lower income residents. And it's New York, so overcrowding. The park's success has led to high foot traffic, creating congestion. The Highline is a landmark urban renewal project, demonstrating how abandoned infrastructure can be transformed into a thriving public space. While it has spurred economic growth and urban revitalization, it has also raised concerns about gentrification. We will be talking about this as well. The project remains a global inspiration for cities rethinking underutilized spaces. Okay, we'll get to our next case study. And once again, all these case studies will kind of relate and tie in as well. So Torre David, Venezuela. It took me some time to do research on this. One of my favorite topics also as well. They're all good. This one actually stuck out to me a lot. So introduction and summary. So Torre David, so the Tower of David, is a 45-story skyscraper in Caracas, Venezuela, that became a vertical slum. That's how it's viewed as in certain articles after its construction was abandoned in 1994 due to an economic crisis. Originally intended as a high-end financial tower, it was never completed. And by 2007, it was occupied by over, get this, 3,000, quote, squatters who transformed the unfinished structure into a self-sustainable community. And we'll talk about this. The residents adapted the space with makeshift homes, businesses, and communal infrastructure, making Torre David an icon of informal urbanism. However, the settlement faced serious structural, safety, and legal challenges. In 2014, the Venezuelan government evicted all of the residents, relocating them to a state housing project. Today, the building remains abandoned and largely inaccessible. History and background. So the original purpose was designed by architect Enrique Gomez and financed by businessman David Brillenberg. It was meant to be Venezuela's premier financial center. Economic collapse. Construction stopped in 1994 due to a banking crisis, leaving the building structurally incomplete. The occupation begins in 2007 as a housing crisis and economic instability led to a coordinated squatter takeover. That's quotes. Informal urbanism and community life. Right? Take note of the photos. Right? Take a look at lifestyle. Take a look at safety infringements, and culture, informal, urban, and community life. So despite being unfinished, Torrey David was adapted into a functioning urban ecosystem, demonstrating innovative self-governance. I'm going to say that again, innovative self-governance. Housing and social structure. The residents self-organized into zones and community leaders managing floors. Apartments were built with makeshift walls, furniture, and partitions. Some spaces were rented within the informal settlements. So, a group of people come over, they pretty it up, and they rent it, right? So infrastructure and daily life. Electricity and water, illegally connected to Caracas' city grid, but unreliable because there's no filtration. So yeah, we could connect water, but are you drinking safe water, right? No formal process of cleansing. No elevators, 45 stories. Residents walked up to get this 30 plus floors with motorbikes used for some internal transport. And certainly, I'll just show some photos before we get into the challenges. But these are the living conditions, right? Challenges and risks, right? So, structural risks. Incomplete construction meant no proper plumbing, windows, or safety parameters. Sanitation and health. Limited access to clean water, waste disposal issues, and disease risks. Crime and security. Some reports link the tower to criminal activity, though residents maintained internal order. Legal status. Government never officially recognized the settlements, leading to evictions in 2014. That was one of the biggest issues, right? And eviction and current status. In 2014, like I said, the Venezuelan government relocated all the residents to public housing, citing safety concerns. The building remains abandoned with no clear plans for its future. Here are just some more photos. Like, I can't imagine us going through something like this in Canada, right? Living conditions like this and allowing it to happen. Although the government intervened in 2014, this has been going on for a good 10 years. Very concerning, very unsafe. And one of the interesting things is that I read an article and I saw a couple of videos on this when I was researching. It was that some of the people in Canada, some of the people around the world, some of the people even in Venezuela who are professional, white collar, looking at this sort of condition will say, hey, why are we living in a slum like this? But if you actually interview the residents, people who are actually born and raised in this, view these areas, 45 stories, as a community. It's like a city within a city, right? Growing up with people, certainly there's infringements of safety concerns, and yeah, I'm sure there were cases where people were, God forbid, hurt, but it's the memories that people grew up with, right? This was my home. This is where I grew up, right? These are some of the realities that people face, right? There was an article where an architect from that town was always commenting how unsafe it is in that house. There's always robberies. There's always, and like I said, even in my article, that some residents maintain order, that it's just because it's an abandoned area, just because people are living in those conditions, people view it as, slum, or, just because they're marginalized, right? And these are some of the concerns that we face in this world. Conclusion, Torrey David is a symbol of urban resilience and informal adaptation, showing how communities self-organize in response to housing crisis. However, it also highlights the challenges of unplanned settlements, including legal conflicts, infrastructure failures, and government intervention, right? Even just looking at this conclusion, folks, right? No handrails, no, making these conditions unsafe. But unfortunately, people viewed areas like this as home. So we'll get into case study number 5. I'm just looking at time. If you just give me just 1 second, just to. Okay. So case study 5, Vauban, Germany. Very interesting topic. I haven't been to this area, but I've studied a lot about it, especially if you're an advocate of green building, which a lot of people are. You'll see and you'll learn very interesting stuff about this this community. Okay, so introduction. Just gonna history and background. Okay, so Vauban, I hope I'm saying it correctly, is a sustainable urban district in Freiburg, Germany, known for its eco-friendly design. Get this, car-free living and energy-efficient homes developed in the 1990s on a former French military base. Vauban is a model of sustainable urbanism, integrating renewable energy, green infrastructure, and participatory planning. The district prioritizing pedestrian and bicycle mobility with limited car access and high environmental standards. What does that remind you of? Some of the downtown areas where I work at, right? Where it's pro, mobility, bicycle, want to try not to promote much driving. We need apply for a building permit these days in the middle hub of downtown Toronto. They want to reduce the parking footprint and promote bicycle parking. So to the next topic. So history and background. Like I mentioned, originally a French military base until the early 1990s, Vauban was repurposed for a sustainable residential district. Development began in 1993, led by the city of Freiburg, with strong input from local residents and grassroots organizations. The goal was to create a self-sufficient, environmentally friendly, and socially integrated community. Sustainable design and infrastructure, energy-efficient buildings. Many homes follow the passive house standard. Sorry, if I'm saying it correctly. Passive house standard, using the minimal energy for heating and cooling. Some homes produce more energy than they consume, plus energy houses. Renewable energy use, solar panels on rooftops, and district heating from wood chip biomass plants reduce reliance on fossil fuels. The neighborhood is nearly carbon neutral. Waste management, rainwater collection systems, and green roofs improve sustainability. Permeable surfaces allow rainwater absorption, reducing runoff. Certainly you'll learn about this a lot in LEED as well. Transportation and car-free living, designed for pedestrians and cyclists. Streets prioritize walking and biking with extensive cycling lanes and pedestrian zones. Minimal car use policies. Cars are, quote, not allowed on most streets, except for certainly emergencies. Residents who own cars must pay for a parking spot in a designated area, discouraging car ownership. Similarly in Toronto, right? And sorry, I'll use examples of Toronto as well. So there's always incentives and disincentives for actually owning a vehicle. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to promote you not to have a vehicle as much as possible, and also restricting access as well. Efficient public transport. A tram line connects Vauban to Freiburg's city center in just 15 minutes. Social and community aspects. Participatory planning. Residents were actively involved in the district's design and decision making. Mixed income housing includes cooperative housing, private homes, and social housing to ensure diversity. Shared green spaces, parks, community gardens, and shared courtyards encourage social interaction. And certainly challenges and criticism. High housing demand and costs. The success of WOBAN has led to higher housing prices, limited affordability, strict car-free policy debate. Some residents and visitors find it inconvenient despite public transport alternatives. So WOBAN is a global model for sustainable urban planning, demonstrating how cities can prioritize renewable energy, eco-friendly architecture, and car-free living as well. Its success has influenced similar projects worldwide through challenges like affordability and accessibility remain. We are at the tail end of it. So I really hope that you all learned a lot about sustainability, affordability, and how there's similarities between some of the practices that we also do. And I really hope that some of the synergies are also very common as well. So yeah, so I think we have some time for some Q&As for sure.
Great. Yeah, we've just reminded everybody there's the Q&A button at the bottom, should be at the bottom of your screen. And so if you just click on the button and then type a question, we'll ask. I know Ashley has a couple of questions while we wait for those other questions to come in.
Sure.
Just great presentation, lots to discuss, a lot of interesting themes. So please type your question in for Hassan.
Okay, so I'll go ahead. Thank you, Hassan. First question, what are some synergies in equitable housing in Canada compared across the world?
Okay, so one of the biggest synergies that I want to talk about actually, key one is affordable housing. Like for example, Canada, through CMHC and municipal initiatives that we all go through, Canada has invested in mixed income housing, rent geared to income, RGI programs, and affordable home ownership. So if you look at a global synergy, for example, Singapore, right, has a world-leading public housing system with over 80% of its citizens housed through subsidized homeownership. Austria, for example, especially Vienna, uses a strong non-profit housing sector with long-term affordability tied to land use. And if you look at some of the shared strategy, right, we look at the public-private partnerships and land use planning, which reduces the housing costs and increases some access control. So this is one of the affordability is one of them as well. Actually, as a matter of fact, there are inclusionary, or if you look at inclusionary zoning as well, very common thing that we're doing in Toronto, right? Municipalities like Toronto now mandate affordability units in new development projects through inclusionary zones. If you look at, for example, a global synergy as well, right? We look at the United States, right? New York, San Francisco, even the UK, right? All have long-standing inclusionary zoning policies, right? And some of the shared strategy we look at is mandating equity, right? In private developments by integrating social policies into planning approvals, right? There's more as well. We can also talk about Indigenous housing rights as well, which is a very common synergy as well that we go through in all parts of the world too. So hope that answers a couple of the questions, a couple of points.
What are your thoughts on using like commercial buildings and adapting them to residential? Because
Very, very,
that's happening quite a bit. And there's a recent project that came out, I think last week, that's being worked on in Flemington Park, I believe. And
yes.
it's not new, but I have seen that many cities across the states, Atlanta, for example, they're doing it. I believe maybe New York is doing it. I know it's being done here and across Canada. So what do you think about that in terms of like what you just spoke about in terms of equitable housing?
I would argue that that is going to be the future trend, especially in a congestion areas. You look at that in very common areas. Downtown Toronto is enforcing that. We have Alberta enforcing that. I heard that on the radio 2 years ago when they were starting that process, because there's not enough room to build, right? And especially in downtown areas and suburbs. So if you go to suburbs, yeah, we can go through that process again. But if you look at the lead process of it, right, it's going to be hard to get jobs, right? If you go to suburb areas, farm areas, right? I live in Milton, Ontario. I take the train every day to downtown Toronto, right? Because that's where the hub is, right? A lot of commercial places being converted into residential and vice versa, right? To an extent, is going to be the trend. And with that, you promote sustainability as well, right? Low construction costs, right? And you get to incentivize by bringing in green products into the community, right? And these are some of the challenges that even architects and developers are going through. Even myself, working for a developer, these are some of the thinking outside the box strategy, right? Figuring out where people can come in from. What are some of the programs that we can have for the community, how we can get community input to maintain that. And a lot of people prefer that process where you're using a commercial property to build residential because they have a history and a background. As long as developers and architects, they maintain that sort of cultural diversity, projects like these become very successful. So I personally am an advocate of that sort of process, and we should be continuing doing that sort of project. And certainly another process is obviously demolition, infill development projects. But for me, taking an existing property and converting it into a useful space is a big win. And I think even the city of Toronto and most municipalities actually encourage that sort of practice and provide incentives to developers for that sort of process.
So we have a few questions coming in through the Q&A.
Yeah.
Do you want me to read them, or do you want to? The first one is specifically about Toronto, and then they're asking if you've ever encountered any concerns raised about inclusive community design here, specifically with respect to safety and security.
Yeah, so especially when you look at the affordable housing process, we are going through a crisis. It's faced a reality. I've lived here. I was born here. And when I've attended these meetings, a lot of the concerns were on inclusionary design, right? Disability. I'm living in a building that's from the 1940s and there's no wheelchair access, right? There's no access for me to enter. So these are some of the biggest challenges that we've gone through. Luckily, our building code evolves during time, and it's the law. You build a new building, you have to make inclusionary, right? You have to have proper wayfinding. You have to install ramps. And even before developing, you have to do a market research on the community and understand what the cultural differences are, nuances are before building, right? And this is why I was talking about how getting community buy-in is very important in conducting your design, right? It's not only about marginalized communities, right? It's also about actual design practices as well, right? Understanding what are some of the needs for that specific community, right? And also looking at the surrounding areas, right? For example, if you're going to build a building or do an infill development project, you got to look at what the community is, what the community cultural background is, what the surrounding principles are, right? Are there areas where we may face gentrification? I'm going to talk about that a lot. These are some of the issues that we go through, right? Displacement. So these are some of the challenges that residents have spoken up. And a lot of the challenges that people have also talked about were, what's going to happen to me while you're building? Where are we going to be? Where are my kids going to be? Where am I going to live? Because I work right over here. Is it going to affect me? So, and certainly these are valid concerns. And these are some of the preemptive approaches that we need to take as developers, as architects, and understand what is plan B, what, based on our market research, based on all these issues, what is it that we can do as leaders to ensure that our community is taken care of while we're constructing.
Yeah, no, it feels like Toronto has a lot of challenges, especially during the pandemic and the way we saw the city and still see the city with encampments and people just going rogue, I guess you could say. And
Absolutely.
oh, like that's one question I had that came up is just, I know you sometimes see people who are building these ad hoc structures or these tiny homes that aren't by building code and they get torn down in the city. Like, what do you think the city could do to make these make things run smoother? And it seems like there's this sort of adversarial relationship between some of the marginalized communities that we're trying to support and the infrastructure and the bureaucracy and the systems in place.
So modular homes is one of the biggest solutions that I've researched on homelessness and ensuring that you meet at least the minimum code requirements and certainly shelters. But then on the other side is that the challenge is space. Now, I worked in downtown Toronto. Remember, Toronto is very diverse. Toronto is very big. The GTA is very big, right? So relocating people in more safer communities, not areas that are like New York, very high rush, high octane. I think, in my opinion, building modular communities in maybe the outskirts of Toronto might be a first step. Second is also looking into mental health programs.
Yeah.
Because then they can be more self-sustainable, right? Yeah. Builds more self-determination, right? And can actually be able to be more autonomous, to be, to live in more communities that are conducive to their environment. So I think modular housing is one of the solutions because it involves less construction, right? No demolition. You just need land. And I've seen land in Toronto, right? I've seen land in Scarborough. Remember, Toronto is very big, diverse, not just the downtown core. We also have outskirts to GTA. And I think once we still continue building programs like this, which we are, definitely you'll see definitely a reduction in these makeshift homes, I believe. Unfortunately, with the economy that we're going through right now, a lot of people that were losing their jobs, a lot of people who are going through economic struggles are now facing these issues, right? We volunteer at food banks. I volunteer at food bank, and I'm looking at the infrastructure, and I see that all the resources are being used very quickly, and it's been in the last 6 months, right? Which shows, there's a correlation between the economy. And certainly the government definitely needs to step up. We pay enough tax dollars to build these homes and to give to the town. So I think it's definitely a good idea to invest in these sort of programs.
Yeah, really good point. Okay, so the next question is about the example of the Mukuru slum upgrading project. The solution to the funding development, who is the investor, if you know, or what type of group? And would that investor, would that be the investor for similar developments in Ontario? Are there major players in this type of?
That is a very good question. I'm just going to pull out my notes. In terms of the investor, I know the government was involved a lot into this project. But sorry, just give me just 1 second. I'm just going through my notes on this. It's a good question. But I believe this was more self-sustained with the community, where they kind of took over and they decided to kind of take over that land, which is why I was saying that the government intervened, and now they're doing a 2030 project right now. So their vision is actually to improve. So the government intervened into self-sustainable projects and now making it more sustainable. So to answer your question, it was the residents that actually originally took over, and then now the government has intervened to try to make it more popular.
And do you know the owner? Was it owned by the government, or does it get owned by the residents at some point?
To that topic, it's informally owned by the residents,
Mhm.
right? Where people took over the land, similar to the vertical slum project, where people assumed responsibility. But the issue is the land tenure security, right? There's no paperwork. So this is like, oh, my father owned this land, but I have no paper. So in actuality, the government actually owns the property if there's no paperwork that proves it. So that's some of the challenges that one of the people were going through. So people informally own the land, but the government has now taken over to redevelop so people can live back onto that land. And then certainly, I think part of their 2030 vision is to kind of figure out some sort of a land tenure security arrangement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of complexity there with the law and the right to
and that's unfortunate because that will not fly here in Toronto, right? You can't just take over and right. Whereas there, it's very informal, right? And certain parts of the world, and this is a very common trend and a very common issue, right? So land tenure security, unfortunately, I've heard of cases where people have gone through fraud as well, making up paperwork. This is my land. Look, this is and unfortunately, there's a lot of corruption that takes place. But
right. But it's a rapidly changing world right now, and it certainly feels like we're in this inflection point in terms of the economy, and I think having these community developments is just going to be so increasingly important to
absolutely
to move forward in a more, as you say, a more equitable and just society, right? That's part of it.
Oh, absolutely. Agreed.
To be not just housed, but housed with dignity as well. So.
Yes, absolutely. That's some of the challenges that we go through around the world and even in Canada as well, right? I mean, economic housing here, socioeconomic housing here, can it be compared to places around the world? It's hard to determine because I've been across the world and I've seen living conditions there versus here. And I always tell myself, in Canada, this will never fly here. The safety requirements will never fly in Canada here, and there are certain areas that are overlooked, which is why, me talking about building laws and requirements, and I would imagine some of the architects even on the call are laughing because they're like, we have to go through this, right? It's the law. Right, we are architects. We have to ensure safety, right? Fortunately, when you look at the vertical slums, you have a building that's built halfway and quote abandoned, right? I don't even know what that word means, abandoned. How could you abandon the project, right? It's just taken over by people, right? And people are living in those conditions. So it's amazing seeing those sort of nuances across the world.
Yeah, and we were saying how adaptable people are too, that they'll just find a way to provide for their family in whatever circumstance they find themselves in. So yeah, I don't see any more questions coming in. I think we can wrap up the presentation unless you had any final thoughts or any comments before we close out the discussion, Hassan. No, okay, so great. This is really great conversation, and I really find these subject matters so important when we think about, I know we're all in the weeds and our day-to-day work, but to take a bigger picture, take a step back, it's so important. So thank you, Hassan, and thank you to all those who are on the call today who participated. Just a couple of quick announcements. We will report your participation on the transcript, as I noted, so you don't have to report, but we just ask for your patience as we accredit the hours. We will also be sending out an email shortly with these beautiful slides, so you'll all get to see the presentation, and we will ask for your feedback via a very, very brief survey. We really appreciate you just taking a couple minutes to fill that out. And that is it. So thank you so much for your attendance today, and please have a pleasant remainder of your day. Thank you, everybody. Bye.